This COVID-19 thing has hurt a lot of loggers. I just want to ask.
It was more than just a show. It was a glimpse into a world most of us could scarcely imagine. A world of mud, muscle, and monumental effort broadcast right into our living rooms. For 4 gripping seasons, swamp loggers did something extraordinary. It took the brutal, unforgiving reality of a niche American industry and turned it into must-see television. And at the center of it all was a man named Bobby Goodson, a logger whose very identity was woven into the fabric of the North Carolina swamps. A leader who carried the weight of his family's legacy and his crew's livelihoods on his shoulders with a quiet, unwavering determination. The show was a hit, a testament to the power of authentic storytelling. But then, just as suddenly as it arrived, it vanished from our screens. The roar of the skitters and the feller bunchers was replaced by an unsettling silence. For years, fans were left wondering, searching for answers to a single, haunting question. Why did swamp loggers disappear? And why did Bobby Goodson never return? The silence only deepened the mystery, transforming the show's end into a kind of legend. And now, after all this time, Bobby Goodson has finally spoken. He has revealed the truth behind the disappearance, and the story is not one of simple cancellation or faded fame. It is a story that is far more profound, and in its own way, absolutely heartbreaking. To understand the end of swamp loggers, you first have to understand the world it was born from. This was not a world created for television. This was the very real, very punishing world of swamp logging, an industry where every single day is a battle against nature itself. The setting was the swamps of North Carolina, a landscape that defies conventional understanding. This is terrain where the very ground is an adversary, where machines weighing tens of thousands of pounds, machines that seem invincible on solid ground, can be swallowed whole by the insatiable muck. It's a place where weather doesn't just cause delays, it causes catastrophes, where hurricanes can flood entire tracts of timber, turning a week's work into a total loss. And the machinery, these colossal, specialized pieces of equipment, groaned under the constant punishment. Breakdowns weren't just plot points for an episode, they were direct threats to the bottom line. Each repair, a drain on finances, each hour of downtime, a race against the clock to meet a quota. But what truly made swamp loggers resonate was not just the spectacle of man versus swamp, it was the men. Bobby Goodson was more than a television personality. He was the heart and soul of Goodson's all-terrain logging, a company started by his father. Viewers didn't just see a boss barking orders, they saw a leader who felt the weight of every paycheck, every equipment payment, every gallon of expensive diesel fuel. His crew wasn't a cast of characters. They were real loggers, men of grit and loyalty, whose lives and families depended on the success of each grueling day. The show's authenticity was its magic. The tension was never manufactured. It came from the very real possibility of a machine sinking in waist-deep water, from the sting of a load of timber being rejected by a mill, from the sheer exhaustion etched on the faces of men who had given everything to pull one more log from the mud. Audiences connected with that honesty. They knew they were witnessing something raw and true, a testament to a fading way of American life. And when the final episode aired, it didn't feel like a conclusion. It felt like a story cut off in the middle of a sentence, leaving a void that reruns could never quite fill. The legend of the show only grew, but the reason for its end remained hidden, buried deep within the very swamps it so vividly brought to life. The success of swamp loggers was a double-edged sword. The spotlight of national television brought Bobby Goodson and his crew a level of fame they never could have imagined. They became unlikely celebrities, symbols of a rugged, blue-collar America that many viewers feared was disappearing. People who had never held a chainsaw felt a connection to these men, riding along in the cabs of their machines, sharing in their triumphs and feeling the sting of their setbacks. Bobby, in particular, became an icon. His leadership style, a unique blend of old-school toughness and deep, genuine compassion for his crew, resonated with millions. He was the kind of man who would demand perfection in a dangerous job, but would never leave a man behind, embodying a code of honor that felt both timeless and rare. But this fame came with a hidden cost. a sacrifice that the cameras never fully captured. The production itself reshaped the very work it was documenting. Every move now had to be coordinated with camera crews. The natural, fluid chaos of a logging operation was now punctuated by the needs of television, reshooting angles, capturing specific reactions, and adhering to production schedules that were utterly divorced from the unpredictable rhythms of the swamp. The constant presence of the lens erased any notion of privacy, turning private struggles into public drama. The pressure intensified. Deadlines weren't just about getting timber to the mill, they were about delivering compelling television, regardless of whether the weather had flooded the worksite or a critical machine had broken down. For Bobby, the man who bore the ultimate responsibility, this added layer of stress was immense. Every decision, every miscalculation was now broadcast for millions to see and judge. The television show didn't change the fundamental economics of logging. It simply magnified them, turning the already high-stakes pressure of running a business into a relentless public spectacle. While viewers could turn off their TVs at the end of the night, Bobby Goodson could not. The weight of his family's legacy, the payroll for his crew, and the staggering costs of fuel and equipment maintenance were his constant, unshakable companions. And beneath the surface of this televised success, the foundations of the industry itself were beginning to crack. Logging has always been a business of razor-thin margins, a constant gamble against forces largely beyond any one person's control. But as the years passed, these pressures mounted into an unbearable weight. The volatile global market began to shift in dangerous ways. The price of diesel fuel, the absolute lifeblood of the operation, began a steady, relentless climb, devouring profits before a single tree was even cut. The mills, their primary customers, became more demanding, rejecting loads of timber for reasons that once wouldn't have mattered, and shifting purchasing terms to favor themselves, not the loggers. Each delivery became a financial gamble. And the equipment, those massive specialized machines that were the key to conquering the swamp, began to show their age. Every repair was more expensive, every parts order delayed by a strained supply chain. The cameras captured the dramatic battles with nature, the mud, and the storms, but they couldn't see the quiet, private battles Bobby fought late at night over spreadsheets that no longer added up. They showed the man who never flinched in the face of a sunk skidder, but they couldn't show the fatigue in his eyes as he calculated whether another week of work would even cover the fuel bill. The dream that was Goodson's all-terrain logging was being slowly, methodically chipped away by an accumulation of economic blows, each one landing with a heavier impact than the last. The swamp was a formidable enemy, but it was an enemy Bobby knew how to fight. The invisible forces of a changing economy, however, were a different kind of storm altogether. Of course. And then, the unthinkable happened. At the height of its popularity, Swamp Loggers was gone. The Discovery Channel canceled the series, leaving a legion of fans confused and longing for more. The absence felt abrupt, like a story cut off mid-sentence. For years, the hope for a revival, a reunion, anything to bring the crew back to our screens, never truly died. But behind that silence, a much larger and more final drama was playing out. The end of filming wasn't the end of the struggle for Bobby Goodson. It was a return to a fight for survival that had only intensified. For nearly a decade after the cameras left, Bobby and his loyal crew continued the grind. Goodson's all-terrain logging kept moving, a testament to a resilience that defined their very way of life. The trucks still rolled, the chainsaws still screamed, and the battle against the unyielding swamp carried on. But they were fighting a war on two fronts, against the timeless physical challenges of the terrain and against a modern economic landscape that was becoming increasingly hostile. Then came the storm of all storms. The year 2020 arrived, and with it, a global pandemic that sent shockwaves through every industry, and logging was no exception. It was the final, crushing blow. Mills shuttered or drastically reduced their operations. Supply chains, already fragile, snapped, and inflation began its relentless surge, driving the cost of every essential, from spare parts to insurance, into uncharted territory. But the most devastating blow was to diesel fuel. The price skyrocketed to previously unimaginable levels, doubling and then doubling again. What was once the lifeblood of the operation now became its poison. Every single day, just to keep the machines running, required a small fortune in fuel, often with no guarantee that the timber they hauled would even cover that day's expense. Bobby Goodson, the man who had built a legacy on overcoming the impossible, was now facing a force that sheer willpower could not conquer. This wasn't a problem that could be solved with a heavier winch or a smarter path through the mud. These were global, macroeconomic tides, and he was a man standing on a shoreline, watching a wave too vast to withstand roll inexorably in. The breaking point was not a single dramatic moment, but a slow, agonizing accumulation of reality. It was in the relentless numbers on an invoice, the quiet dread before reviewing the weekly ledger, the heavy silence in the cab of his truck. He was carrying more than a business. He was carrying his father's name, the trust of his crew, and the weight of a legacy that felt too heavy to lay down. And then, in a move that showed both his vulnerability and his profound respect for the fans who had followed his journey, Bobby sat down for a live stream. He appeared not as the invincible television star, but as a man weathered by a lifetime of battle. And with a pause that seemed to carry the weight of all those years, he spoke the words that would finally bring closure to the mystery. "I can't hide this any longer," he said. He revealed the heartbreaking truth. Goodson's all-terrain logging, the company that had been the very soul of swamp loggers, was shutting down. After nearly 4 decades, the fight was over. The perfect storm of soaring fuel prices, crippling market shifts, and overwhelming operational costs had finally won. He confessed the economic reality that made continuing impossible, his voice cracking with the gravity of the moment. It was not a failure of spirit or skill, but a surrender to forces larger than any one man, no matter how resilient. The confession was the final chapter. Without the company, there could be no show. The legend of swamp loggers was inextricably tied to the real, gritty, beautiful struggle of a family business, and now that business was closing its doors. The roaring engines fell silent, and the swamp, in time, began to reclaim the paths carved by immense determination. But in that ending lies a profound dignity. Bobby Goodson's story, and the story of his crew, was never just about logging. It was a documentary in the truest sense, a lasting record of a way of life, of the immense human cost behind the resources we often take for granted. It was about the unbreakable bonds forged in adversity and the quiet strength of the people who work in the shadows of our economy. The mystery is solved. The truth is known. And while the swamp may be quiet now, the legacy of those men, the thunder of their machines, and the lessons in their struggle echo on, a powerful reminder of the price of a dream and the unyielding respect we owe to those who live it.